This is a true story of how a bankrupt nation transformed stolen gold into the deadliest war machine in modern history. On March 12, 1938, Nazi commandos walked into the Austrian central bank in Vienna and seized 91 tons of gold, 4 times what Germany possessed at that moment, saving Hitler's rearmament program from total collapse. What followed was the greatest robbery in world history. Over 600 tons of gold stolen from central banks, Jewish families, and Holocaust victims, then laundered through neutral countries to buy oil, chrome, and tungsten that powered the Wehrmacht across Europe. I want you to understand something that many documentaries only whisper. This gold didn't just finance tanks and planes. Every bar that passed through Swiss vaults, every wedding ring melted in Berlin's refineries, every dental crown pulled from a murdered victim, all of it was converted into bullets, fuel, and steel that killed millions. This is the story of how theft and murder became a currency, and how much of that blood money was never truly returned. The crisis, when paper became worthless. Let me take you back to 1923 Weimar, Germany, where the nightmare began. Picture a mother meeting her husband outside his factory 3 times a day, not to visit, but to collect his wages before the money became worthless. By mid-1923, German currency was inflating at 3,250,000% per month. Prices doubled every 2 days. Children played with stacks of billion-mark notes like building blocks because the paper was worth more as a toy than as money. Workers' wives would sprint from the factory gates to shops, clutching wheelbarrows full of cash, racing against time itself. But increasingly, they found only empty shelves. Farmers refused to bring food into cities in exchange for worthless paper. Storekeepers couldn't restock fast enough to protect their receipts from evaporating. It was cheaper to burn money than to buy firewood. This catastrophe destroyed the German middle class, normally the backbone of any stable republic. Millions who had saved their entire lives watched their security vanish. Many turned to rabid, right-wing movements. Others joined the communists. But everyone learned one brutal lesson that would shape the next war. The entire world had lost faith in German currency. No foreign supplier would accept Reichsmarks for oil, steel, or food. Only gold was trusted. Only gold was real. When Adolf Hitler seized power in 1933, Germany's gold reserve stood at a pathetic 27 tons. The country had massive foreign debts and was still cut off from international credit. Hitler himself had nothing but contempt for money or economics, believing only in willpower and brute force. But he understood one thing perfectly. If Germany was going to rearm and expand, it needed gold, and lots of it. The architect, Hjalmar Schacht's gold machine. Enter Hjalmar Horace. Greeley, Schacht, one of the most brilliant and morally compromised financial minds of the 20th century. His middle name came from his father, a failed German immigrant to America who admired the publisher Horace Greeley. Schacht had been conceived in the United States, but born in Germany just after his parents returned. It was this man, respected internationally for ending the Weimar hyperinflation, who would build the financial engine of Nazi conquest. Schacht knew Germany's weakness from World War I. The British blockade had starved millions by cutting off imports of food and raw materials. His solution was called autarky, economic self-sufficiency. In September 1934, he unveiled his new plan. Germany would restrict imports to only arms-related raw materials and foodstuffs. The country would manufacture as much as possible domestically and trade with South America and Southeastern Europe using Reichsmarks. But there was a fatal gap in the plan. Certain materials, oil from Romania, ball bearings from Sweden, chromium from Turkey, could not be produced inside Germany and could not be bought with paper marks. These critical war materials had to be purchased with the only currency every nation on earth still accepted, gold. Imagine being Schacht in early 1938. Hitler's rearmament program was draining Germany's tiny gold reserves at a terrifying rate. The regime was almost out of foreign currency. Within months, the entire war buildup would have to stop. Schacht needed a miracle. What he got instead was an invasion. The first heist, Austria's 91 tons. On Saturday morning, March 12, 1938, the German Wehrmacht rolled into Vienna. While the world watched the Anschluss, the annexation of Austria, a parallel operation unfolded in silence. Wilhelm Kepler, a businessman and early Hitler supporter, arrived at the Austrian central bank with two armed Nazi commandos. They weren't there to celebrate, they were there to rob. Schacht had inside knowledge through his close relationship with the Bank for International Settlements. He knew the Austrian central bank held approximately 100 tons of gold, nearly 4 times Germany's reserves. Within hours, 91 tons of Austrian gold was seized and transported to Berlin, along with 14.3 tons of private gold confiscated from Vienna's large and wealthy Jewish community. The timing was miraculous for the Nazis. On October 3, 1938, Emil Pohl, soon to become vice president of the Reichsbank, wrote in a memo, "The rapid implementation of rearmament was only possible because of the use of available gold, foreign exchange from the former Reich, and the immediate recovery of Austrian gold. Without that stolen Austrian fortune, Hitler's war machine would have ground to a halt before it truly began." Schacht himself traveled to Vienna to personally oversee the Nazi takeover of the Austrian central bank. In a festive ceremony at its headquarters, he led the staff in a pledge of allegiance to Hitler. Can you imagine that moment? A respected international banker, celebrated for saving Germany from economic chaos, now conducting a loyalty oath to a dictator while standing on top of a fresh heist. It's the kind of scene that should make us ask, at what point does expertise become complicity? After the war, only 50,182 kilograms out of the original 78,267 kilograms stolen from Austria were ever returned. The rest was declared part of a gold pool for all looted monetary gold and eventually granted to an international victim fund in 1998, 60 years after the theft. The system. How the gold machine operated. Once Austria proved the concept, the pattern repeated across Europe like a criminal franchise. When Nazi forces invaded Belgium in May 1940, they discovered the Belgian government had evacuated 198 tons of gold to France for safekeeping. The Belgians believed their treasure was secure. They were wrong. Germany seized the Belgian gold and forced the collaborating Vichy French government to hand it over. Under Hermann Göring's orders, every bar was melted down and recast with Prussian stamps to obscure its origin. The Nazis looted $223 million worth of gold from Belgium and $193 million from the Netherlands, and these figures don't include anything stolen from private citizens or companies. Czechoslovakia lost an estimated $1.1 billion in today's value when the Bank of England, astonishingly, helped Nazi Germany transfer Czech gold just days after the occupation in March 1939. 5.6 million worth of gold was moved from Czech national bank accounts to Reichsbank accounts through the Bank for International Settlements. Professor Albrecht Ritschl of the London School of Economics later described it bluntly. The Bank of England coldly, and while feigning ignorance, consented to the transfer. Britain's own central bank had become an unwitting, or worse, uncaring accomplice. Poland, France, and Italy followed. When Germany occupied Italy, 119 tons of Italian gold were seized from Rome, moved to Milan, then to an abandoned fortress on the Austrian border, and finally shipped to Berlin in 1944. In total, Germany started World War II with about $120 million in gold and ended up seizing well over $600 million from occupied nations. But monetary gold from central banks was only part of the horror. The other part came from people. Victim gold. The Reichsbank's darkest account. In August 1942, SS Captain Bruno Melmer began making regular deliveries to the Reichsbank in Berlin. He brought suitcases and crates filled with jewelry, foreign currency, coins, precious metals, gold fillings, and dental crowns. All of it had been taken from Holocaust victims in the death camps, Belzec, Sobibor, Treblinka, and Auschwitz. The Reichsbank had a system. They kept the foreign currency. The jewelry went to the Berlin Municipal Pawn Shop, where lower quality items were sent to industrial smelters. The fine gold extracted from these personal belongings, wedding rings, necklaces, teeth, was held in a special account at the disposal of the Reichsbank. It was called the J account. J for Jew. Some items arriving at the Reichsbank bore stamps. Auschwitz, along with the names of other concentration camps. The smelting was done by the Degussa refinery. The gold was melted down, recast into bars, and mixed with legitimate central bank reserves. Then it was ready for sale. U.S. archival documents later confirmed that investigators found Reichsbank smelting records showing victim gold was mixed in with bank gold sold to Switzerland. There was no separation, no accounting. A bar that had once been a grandmother's wedding ring could sit beside a bar looted from the Belgian treasury. To the neutral bankers who bought it, it all looked the same: clean, stamped, valuable. Imagine you are a Swiss banker in 1943 inspecting a delivery of German gold bars. They are perfectly cast, properly weighed, and stamped with official Reichsbank seals. Do you ask where they came from? Do you demand to see the original source? Or do you accept the metal, credit the account, and look away? Many of you have written in the comments on previous videos asking whether the Swiss really knew. The evidence is clear. They knew. A commission led by historian Jean-François Bergier found that the Swiss National Bank received $440 million in gold from Nazi sources, of which $316 million is estimated to have been looted. More damning, the Bergier Commission found that the SNB's governing board knew at an early point that the gold was looted from other countries. The laundromat, neutral countries, and war materials. Here's how the system worked in practice. Think of it as a washing machine that turned blood-stained money into something that looked clean. Germany would ship looted gold, both monetary and victim gold, to the Swiss National Bank. The Swiss would credit Germany's account with Swiss francs, a stable and internationally accepted currency. Germany then used those francs to purchase oil from Romania, ball bearings from Sweden, chromium from Turkey, and tungsten from Portugal. None of those countries would accept Reichsmarks, but they would accept Swiss francs, and they would accept gold. The U.S. State Department estimated that Germany sold roughly $300 million in gold to Swiss banks and laundered about $140 million through Switzerland for payment of goods from Portugal and Spain. Much of the gold Germany transferred to neutral countries, Portugal, Spain, Sweden, and Turkey, went through the Swiss National Bank. Without this laundering network, the German war machine would have been starved of fuel and materials within a year. Switzerland wasn't alone. Portugal played a particularly cynical role. In 1942, the Swiss National Bank arranged gold swaps with the Banco de Portugal, exchanging tainted gold in Europe for clean gold held in Canada. To complete these swaps, the Banco de Portugal charged the Swiss steep commissions, 1.5% on the first swap, 2.5% on the second. They were, quite literally, profiting from washing Nazi gold. Swedish banks accepted over $20 million in looted gold and returned less than $15 million after the war. Spain and Turkey kept nearly everything. These were not ignorant mistakes. These were business decisions made by bankers, officials, and governments who prioritized profit and neutrality over the lives being destroyed. What they didn't know in 1943 was that American soldiers were about to stumble onto the evidence. The discovery, Merkers salt mine. In early April 1945, as the U.S. Third Army advanced into central Germany, two French women approached American soldiers near the town of Merkers Kieselbach. They had information. There was gold hidden in a disused salt mine nearby. The report was quickly relayed up the chain of command, and other local witnesses confirmed the story. On April 12, 1945, Generals Dwight D. Eisenhower, Omar Bradley, and George S. Patton descended 1,000 feet beneath the surface into the Merkers mine. What they found in the underground chambers stopped them cold. There were 219 tons of gold bars stacked in piles. There was foreign currency from a dozen nations. There were thousands of paintings and artworks looted from museums and private collections across Europe. And then there were the bags, hundreds of bags, filled with wedding rings, watches, eyeglasses, gold fillings, and dental crowns. One American officer later wrote that it was at this moment they understood the full depth of Nazi evil, not just the theft of national treasures, but the systematic murder and robbery of individuals down to the gold in their teeth. Eisenhower ordered photographers to document everything. He knew the world would need to see this. He knew many would refuse to believe it. In February 1945, as the war neared its end, Berlin officials had sent 2 trainloads of gold and precious art to Merkers for safekeeping. They rescued 219 tons, but Nazi Germany had stolen over 600 tons. Where was the rest? Much of it had already been laundered and spent. It was in Swedish bank accounts, Portuguese reserves, Swiss vaults, and Turkish treasuries. It had been converted into oil that powered tanks across Poland, into tungsten that hardened artillery shells, into chrome that plated bomber engines. The gold was gone, transformed into the machinery of conquest and into profit for neutral nations. The aftermath, tripartite commission and incomplete justice. When the war ended, the Allies established the Tripartite Commission for the Restitution of Monetary Gold in September 1946. Representatives from the United States, Britain, and France were tasked with recovering looted gold and returning it to the rightful countries. The commission was headquartered in Brussels and began reviewing claims. But there wasn't enough. All the gold recovered from Merkers and other hiding places totaled far less than what had been stolen. Each country that filed a claim received only about 65% of what they were owed. Belgium, which lost 198 tons, recovered around 130 tons through the tripartite pool, 2/3 of what was taken. The negotiations with neutral countries were shameful. The US and Britain took the lead in pressuring Switzerland, and the result was the 1946 Washington Accord. Switzerland agreed to return gold worth only $58 million, a fraction of the $440 million they had received from Nazi Germany. The other neutral countries returned even less. Sweden paid back $18.5 million out of at least $240 million in looted gold it had received. The Tripartite Gold Commission completed most of its work in the 1950s, then lingered for decades. It was not formally dissolved until September 9, 1998, more than 50 years after the war ended. Even then, about $60 million worth of gold remained in dispute. And what about the victim gold? The wedding rings, the dental crowns, the personal jewelry stolen from families before they were murdered. Much of that was never traced. It had been melted, mixed, and laundered so thoroughly that separating it from monetary gold became impossible. Some of it still sits in Swiss vaults under the label heirless assets. Many of you have asked in previous comments, were the settlements enough? Should governments reopen these cases even now, even if it cost billions? The uncomfortable truth. Here's what we know. A bankrupt Germany, armed with stolen gold, purchased the fuel and materials to wage the most destructive war in human history. Neutral countries, Switzerland, Portugal, Spain, Sweden, Turkey, made immense profits by laundering that gold and selling Germany the resources it needed to keep fighting. Without their cooperation, the war would have ended sooner. Millions of lives might have been saved. After the war, these same neutral nations returned only a small fraction of what they had taken. No senior banker was prosecuted. No government was held to full account. The gold, or the value it represented, remained in their vaults, in their reserves, in their economies. And the victim gold? The gold pulled from the mouths and fingers and necks of murdered families, most of it vanished into the financial system, indistinguishable and unrecoverable. I want you to imagine something. Somewhere today, in a bank vault or a private collection, there may be a bar of gold that was once part of a family heirloom. It was seized at gunpoint in Vienna or Warsaw. It was melted in Berlin. It was sold to a Swiss bank. It was traded for oil or tungsten. And now, 80 years later, it sits in a secure facility, clean and legitimate, with no record of where it truly came from. If you found that bar of gold and really knew its history, what would you do? Would you return it, even if the original owners are all dead? Would you donate its value, or would you keep it, arguing that the crimes are too old, the trail too cold, the victims too long gone? Some of you will say justice is impossible when most of the witnesses are dead. Others will say justice delayed is not justice at all. It's just another form of theft, slower and quieter, but theft nonetheless. Hitler turned stolen fortunes into a war machine, yes. But what made that machine run wasn't just his willpower or Germany's engineering. It was the cold, calculated cooperation of bankers and governments who saw profit in gold and chose not to ask where the blood came from. The uncomfortable truth is this: the war was funded by gold, but the gold was accepted by men who knew, or should have known, what it cost. If stories like this matter to you, share this video and subscribe so more people hear them. History doesn't repeat, but it echoes.